Hi.
Hey guys.
How's it going?
Good morning or afternoon, depending on, or I guess evening, depending on where you are in the world.
Right? It's morning for me, 9:30.
Yeah, sometimes I'm so focused on like US time zones that I'm like, wait a second, people could really be anywhere at any time.
All over the world. Well, wherever you are, hello. Thank you. Thanks for stopping in for our live.
Yep. Liz and I are going to be chatting about a kind of serious topic. Hopefully, it won't be too stressful to talk about, but
I'm so stressed out already. We were joking backstage. I'm like, okay, one more minute. Here we go.
yes, but we're going to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty of some tactics of cults and coercive control and undue influence. And as cult survivors and former cult hoppers, that can be stressful, but I think it's necessary. We both think it's a good thing to talk about and share our experience about. So we're excited to get into it with you guys. If it is your first time watching us, hi, I'm Cassie Marie, No Culty Vibes on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, or the.Cassie Marie on those platforms. I am a former cult hopper. Like I said, I was in an MLM and an evangelical Christian cult and then a business coaching cult. And that was so traumatic that I started learning about cults by watching Scientology in the aftermath. Started deconstructing cults, religion, all the things, and now I make content about it. And I talk a lot about cults and pop culture. And this is Liz Gale.
Hello, it is me. I don't know how to come back with that great intro. I have one cult, 3 generations. It was Scientology, and I was raised as a 3rd generation Scientologist, which is its own wackery, and used a lot of confessions and crime thought processes, which was what we wanted to drill down into today. I want everybody to know how this stuff works because surprisingly, what we're going to get into today applies not just to Scientology and not just to, quote, cults, but it's a really good red flag to know when you are joining any type of group. Because if you see people doing certain things, red flag, get the hell out, run for your life.
Yep. Yeah, and cults exist on a spectrum, and even groups that aren't cults can be culty or start getting toxic or even potentially dangerous. So yeah, exactly what you said. It's important to know the red flags. So when it comes to, really quick, what we needed to say, if you notice that Liz and I in this live are trying to avoid saying certain words and some of the things that we're going to talk about later, please don't type those words in the chat. Keep in mind YouTube
No naughty words,
rules and things like that. So if you're
yeah.
like, oh, Cassie and Liz mean blah, 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 don't type it out in the chat. So fair warning that this can be, yes, a potential trigger warning. We are going to discuss some potentially difficult topics. So just be aware. And as always, be aware consuming cult content because it can get pretty stressful, harmful, lots of potential triggers. Also, we are going to be starring comments, and we won't be reading your comments throughout the video as we're talking about the topic, but we see them, we're going to star some of them, and at the end we're going to go through some of the starred comments that stand out to us and talk a little bit about those as well. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up.
I do see a comment in here from Mena. The chat is censored. You'll see. We're going to read out loud some of a security check, a list of questions from Scientology, and they do have words that would be best not in the chat. You'll see them you'll know them when you see them. We're all
and I think YouTube does kind of flag things in the chat as well. And also nobody super knows 100% how YouTube flags these things or looks into these things. So it's just safer to be mindful of everyone else's mental health, be mindful of your mental health, be mindful of algorithms, all the things. Okay, so
because it's gonna get weird.
Yeah.
Sorry. Everything Scientology gets weird. Okay, enough verbal prophylactic. We've explained ourselves. Have we not? Oh, there's more.
No, I was just
Like
gonna
that.
say, I was also going to say that our last live was kind of a salacious live, and I was gonna be like, "This one might not be as crazy," but actually it probably is going to be
Yeah.
because Scientology is wild.
It's funny that you bring that up because, the whole SPTV drama that we talked about in our last, live, after we did the live is when, Aaron went on that whole rabbit hole down the rabbit
Yeah.
hole show, and he basically did a full confession. I mean,
Mhm,
and it was so interesting from my perspective just to see it all play out, and
mhm,
that was when we had scheduled this one because
mhm.
it's really interesting to see confessions or secrets or crimes or shame as like a behavioral tool that can actually be used against us,
Yeah.
like it be used as manipulation. And to watch that kind of play out, I'm not trying to speak on Aaron, I just like everybody saw it unfold and we're all trying to make sense of what's happening. And the way
Right.
that I was making sense was seeing a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And how we react under pressure a lot of times is how we were raised. And so since I was raised in a similar way, I was like, "Oh boy, here it comes."
We gotta talk about it. We
Yeah,
gotta
so
talk about it.
yeah. So
So
let's go back to the beginning, right?
yes.
Like the
Yes.
bite model?
Yes, I was
Okay,
gonna
cool.
say, let's look at where this falls on the bite model because this is such a tool of coercion. Do we wanna be at the bottom or on the side? Let's do it like this. I hope you guys can kind of see this and read it. I can't. So
Gonna go
I'm
from
gonna read it from my phone. But the use of confessions in cults is part of information control. You'll see it
Mhm.
here, and then I think I can scroll through. It also can be used as a form of emotional control. When it's used as a form of information control, it is number 6 at the bottom here, unethical use of confession. It
Yep.
is when information about sins are used to disrupt and or dissolve identity boundaries, withholding forgiveness or absolution for those sins, and manipulation of memory and possibly false memories. And I feel like this happens a lot in Scientology too. And Liz, maybe you can speak to this a bit, but a lot of times when you're doing these confessions in Scientology, they'll make you look into past lives, right? So they try to kind of implant memories that you may or may not have. And this will not be a confession about whether past lives are real or not. But when it comes to this life that we're in right now, those are not memories from this life. So a lot of times these confessions can be confessions that you didn't even do. It can be something that's not even a thing. And it can be used as information against you, either inside the cult, like if you're not conforming to their beliefs or their rules, or you're not behaving the way that they want you to behave, they can use this information against you, either threaten you with it or say, kind of gaslight you and remove you from your own identity, where they're like, you don't even know what you're talking about because you've confessed to doing this, this, and this, and being this kind of person. So why should we listen to you, let you do whatever it is you want to do, things like that. So that's how it's used as information control, to gather information from you that can then be used to manipulate you or as a tool of undue influence, making you believe things that you may not have believed otherwise. And then as emotional control, there were two parts of this that I wanted to point out.
Before we
Um,
go into the emotional control quickly,
yeah,
so
yeah,
I'm looking at this as well, and this is one thing that gosh, before we talked, I was like, "Oh, we're not gonna get too personal." Boom, now we're gonna get personal. Um, this one, information about sins used to disrupt or dissolve identity boundaries. That
mhm,
one in particular is really, really interesting to me, as in particular thinking about children in cults. What does it
mhm,
really do? What did it do to me, guys? What's the mental diagnosis of being like interrogated, like forced confessionals so many
mhm.
times when you're growing up? Don't even tell me because I probably don't wanna know, but
I was like, we can dive into
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Rhetorical question. I'm me every day, so I guess I have a really good idea.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I didn't think of this as information control, but it is in so many levels because not only is there the internal information, because there's something about giving up a piece of yourself, telling somebody something when they're kind of pulling it out of you that is it's a disgusting feeling, And it's not just in Scientology. You can tell when somebody's doing that. Right? Like trying to get you to say that you did something wrong. It's like that magnified. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, because narcissists will do that, like, to varying degrees in
Yes.
whatever relationship you are potentially in with a narcissist, romantic or otherwise, familial, friendship, anything. They
Right.
will do that. They will do things like trying to get you to confess things or be vulnerable with them or tell them things that they then know,
Right.
and their information gathering on you is kind of how I see this being used as information control. And then
Mhm.
also, because you're in the same way, I always thought it was just emotional control, because we'll talk about that in a second of how it is emotional control. But yeah, I see it as extracting information from you and then also potentially planting false information when like you're confessing things that you
Right.
never did, but like are not actually things you ever did.
Yeah, I think for past lives, like you're talking about before. So in Scientology, you have to go earlier, earlier, earlier. So we can get into this whole thing, but if you're a kid and you're going earlier memory, earlier memory, earlier memory, you're going to end up in a different lifetime as this lifetime. You
Mhm.
guys can probably hear my rooster. I'm so sorry. He's just learning how to crow and he's just sitting right outside the window showing off.
I could
Um,
barely hear it. I
oh,
heard
good.
it a tiny bit. I thought it was outside my house, so
Yeah, he's a man now. Um, so I thought the implanting of memories was really interesting because I actually talk about it in my book a little bit. I thought I was so embarrassing. It's one thing to write it, one thing to say it. I thought I was Queen Elizabeth, the first in a past
I
life for a minute.
actually love that though.
And I attested to that in Scientology. So like, I don't know, I guess I believed it. And then I found out later that a lot of people have that same experience, which was my first experience with a group delusion, party on, group delusion style. Um, but it was really interesting to me. So to see this, because I never heard about the bite model till long after I left Scientology, and to actually see that confession is on the this
Right,
list. It's not a very big list, guys. I mean, it's
right.
broken down into parts, but like use of confession, false memories. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, what mind games. So it is information. Tell me about the emotional part.
So with the emotional control, it does just flat out say it, and on number 7, ritualistic and sometimes public confession of sins. And
Yes.
I feel that in Scientology, the auditing is kind of like a ritualistic confession. It's something you're required to do.
Mhm.
Um, repeatedly and over time and again. And in Scientology, I guess that's a good question to ask. Did you ever publicly have to confess things in Scientology, or was it always supposed to be private with your auditor?
Yes, you do have public aspects of confession. Typically, you would confess everything in an auditing or a one-on-one basis, and then what you had, or you would write, and it would be all be written down by you or somebody else, and then you would take that and you would have to go apply what are called conditions. And in some of those steps you do have to publicly put notices up, and then one of them you have to go around and get signatures from people in your group that allow you back into the group.
Wow.
That's the liability formula, and that's like the top of the lower conditions where you have basically been found to be a liability by the group, and you need to make up the damage and figure it out and come
Wow.
back and get signatures. And, as a kid, I know I go back to this, but like it's very bizarre to do that. It's very bizarre to say I had gone by words I didn't understand in my dictionary, in my book. And so now I'm a liability to the group. And now I'm going around getting signatures after working dishes to make up the damage for, say, 8 hours. Now I'm asking my friends for signatures. It's very, very humiliating.
Yeah.
So, thanks for listening to that story. That just came out of my face, but that's a real life experience, so there
Yeah,
you go.
and I feel like that provides a lot of extra insight, as well, because I mean, I didn't grow up in Scientology, so I don't know all even though I've listened to you guys talk about it a lot. I feel like I know a lot of things by
Me too.
now.
Me
There's still things that, like, aren't super clear, and I think it's helpful to hear how these play out in different ways so that it's easier to spot patterns and you can recognize it potentially in your own groups or in areas of your own life.
Mhm.
The other part of emotional control that I feel like this applies to is number 3, where it says it makes the person feel that problems are always their own fault, never the leader or group's fault. In my
Yeah.
experience and the cults that I was a part of, that's also primarily what that information from different confessionals, public or private, that's primarily what it was used for,
Mhm.
was to make you feel like everything happening is your fault and not the group's fault and not the leader's fault, and you're not applying this stuff correctly because you have sinned in like this way or that way, or you have done something negative in this way or that way to pull it in. And I can talk a little bit about how these apply to my cults if you want before we dive into some of the questions on the Scientology confessions. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, I totally wanna do that.
Okay, I'll take these off.
Thank
So, I was chatting with Liz just briefly beforehand, and I was, like I said in the intro, I was in an MLM, and my experience in an MLM, I did not see public confessions or any use. I wasn't really required to confess anything. I have heard some people mention some ways where this could have happened, but it just wasn't my direct experience, so I don't know exactly how that plays out in MLMs. Now, in the evangelical Christian cult that I was a part of, I was taught how to be a Christian psychic, basically. We called it prophetic or prophetic ministry, where we learned to hear things from God for ourselves or others. And we sometimes did this prophetic ministry in a group. So sometimes on Sundays, our prophetic ministry team, which was like 3 or 4 people, would sit with someone coming to our church for that ministry. Or we sometimes did it like within our own leadership or within our own group, like not always outside people. And we were taught that we were only supposed to use this to comfort people and edify them, etc. But as you can imagine, these systems allow for potentially predatory or harmful people to do harmful things. So it wasn't always the rules of being comforting and edifying and all that weren't always followed. So sometimes they would try to like extract sins from you. So
Mhm.
they would say, well, God told me that you're struggling in this area of your life. Like you're struggling with worshiping false idols. I'm literally just trying to make things up. I'm so far removed from this. Sometimes it's harder to like think back to what they made
Mhm.
us think of. But basically, they would convince you that they are hearing from God,
Mhm.
and because they do prophetic ministry or are in leadership, like sometimes pastors would do this, they hear from God for you better than you do. And they would say, you are sinning in this area. God told me. And even if you didn't feel like that was true for you, eventually you would be convinced of it. And then that could be used against you if you tried to bring up something else or if you tried to leave. Usually they kind of push and push and push until you admit that you've done this sin. And then you're convinced that you've done a
Mhm.
sin that you may not have agreed with in the first place, that you don't feel like you did in the first place. So I saw that play out a lot in that church or in churches like it, because there's a whole network of churches that are very similar. And then I saw this happen in the coaching industry, in like
Mm.
business coaching or spiritual coaching, especially if you did a group coaching program.
Mhm.
Um, you were trying to improve yourself, right? So self-improvement cults, I've heard lots of people talk about this in different ways. But you're in a group, you're trying to better yourself. And a lot of times that presents as trying to figure out what's wrong with you, right? What are the
Mhm.
things you're going wrong? What are the things you need to improve on? And if, depending on how terrible of a leader you have or coach you have, they could convince you that you're bringing in negative energy or you're
Mhm.
doing something wrong over here. And they're the coach, they're the authority. So they know better than you do
Right.
about yourself and what's going wrong. And then again, that can be used if you're like, hey, I paid this coach a lot of money and I'm not seeing the results that were promised to me from paying this money. And
Yeah.
I thought they knew more about what they were talking about. And then the coach can then bring that sin back to you, that sin or that
Mhm.
thing that you're doing wrong back and say, well, you did this, this, and this. So
Mhm.
you're wrong. You're bad. You're bringing this negative energy in. It's not me. It's
Right.
not the it's you and the bad things
Right.
that you
That's such a classic narcissistic response in it from a group, like that's so culty. That is
Mhm.
culty to a T.
And
Yeah.
one of the weird things about business coaching is you're trying to create this brand or this persona online as well. So
Mhm.
sometimes coaches will have you like publicly post your confessions or your
Mm.
sins as a way to like
Gross.
clear them
Yeah.
or overcome them or take ownership of them.
Mhm.
So then like you're publicly on the internet forever, not
Right.
just within your group or cult anymore,
Right.
posting these public confessions, and I've seen that be very, very weird and very harmful as well.
Yeah, that sounds awkward. And I feel like that's just more of this, starts to be the surface. It gets so much more sinister the deeper inside a secretive group you go, like Nexium with
Mhm.
the women that joined DOS. So within the cult of Nexium, there were some handpicked women who were chosen to go the extra mile, and part of that was giving collateral.
Yep.
They wrote things down that they didn't even do, that they tried to seduce someone or they were with someone, and they had it in writing, kept it in a file saying, if you ever change your mind, if you ever speak out about us, we will use this information against you. And there's no proof that Scientology has done that per se to someone like John Travolta or Tom
Mhm.
Cruise. Um,
There's
but a lot
speculation.
of yeah, there's a lot of speculation. There are a lot of ex-Scientology high members who say that everything is recorded, audio, visual, and written down, kept. So why wouldn't you? Why would you have that information if not to use it to some degree,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, it's so bizarre. And at least there's some faith in the Christian aspect. It's like, oh well, give up the power and maybe some higher power will help you. In some cults, it's like they approach it like science. In Scientology, they'll tell you we can actually look at there's a whole quote technology about why bad things happen to you, and it always ends in you paying them money and writing down all your crimes.
Right.
It's just par for the course. Um, you
Yeah,
might
at
know.
least in some, like, evangelical Christian settings, you're not necessarily paying for them. You're giving them all of your free labor, but
Yeah,
not always all of your free labor and all of your money.
I know. And that's one of the main things that I really want people to realize is what are you willing to pay for? If you were going to join Scientology one day, like, do you really want to pay for this? Do you really want to pay for somebody interrogating you at their
Mhm.
discretion, not yours? Do you really
Yeah.
want that? And
That's
that's
why I think
constantly what happens. Go
That's
ahead.
why I think Scientology woke me up from, like, the business coaching cults the
Mhm,
most, because I realized I was paying thousands of dollars for an
mhm,
unlicensed person, a non-professional, to go through my mind and,
mhm.
like, mess with it in a some people felt like it was helpful, some people felt like it was very helpful, and I couldn't believe that people were convincing all of these people to pay thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars
Yeah,
for basically psychologically messing with you to the point where you need so much therapy afterward.
exactly,
It's
exactly.
wild.
It is wild, and it is interesting to see it used, like, now that I'm outside of it. I have been in Scientology, it's called a security check, which is the one where it has a pre-made list and they ask you all your crimes, and there's a bunch of different ones. I probably have been security checked, I don't even know, a dozen times in just before I was, 23. maybe not a dozen, maybe 10. But you have to be security checked every time you leave anything with Scientology. Anytime you are done with staff or done in the Sea Org or you're like moving on somewhere, it's always like, get the information. It's very Cold War era debriefing.
Yeah.
Um,
And to do that before your frontal lobe is even fully developed, I feel like has a whole other set of things that it does to your mind.
Absolutely. I'm going to pull up this image. Okay, can you see it?
Mhm.
Oh, I called him the wrong name earlier. This is John Travolta, everybody. Um, let's talk about this for a second because in Scientology, when you are having a confessional, everybody has their own way of doing it. From what I understand, say there's a confessional booth in a Catholic church, and they have their rituals essentially of how they go through that process.
Mhm.
I don't claim to know any more about it than what I've seen in the movies. But Scientology would argue that this is their religious process and that this e-meter is a religious artifact. Um,
Mhm.
so when you are getting a confessional or you are being interrogated is what I'm going to call it by Scientology, you actually are going the extra step because you're sitting there holding these cans and you see the wires and they're going to that device with the hand on it. You can see that piece of wood in between. He can't see anything that's happening behind the meter. He can't see what she's writing down, or he can't see what they're seeing. He's just being asked questions, and he's knowing, because he's a believer, that electronic pulse that's going through his body is actually telling the needle on the other side of there when he is being truthful, when he is telling everything, and when all of the negative energy about a topic has left his body. So imagine that's a list of questions in front of this person. And they would ask a question, say, have you ever kicked a fence? I mean, it wouldn't be that. I'm being very PG. And he could sit there and say, no, I haven't kicked a fence. And they're like, well, the needle is moving a particular way. I will ask the question again. And it's very robotic. I will repeat the question. Have you ever kicked a fence? Oh, I haven't kicked a fence. I never did that before. Oh, well, you did. They don't say that, but they ask the question. I'll repeat the question. And we can
Yeah.
get Serge Del Mar on here. He was the guy on the other side when he was, on the other side of the meter when he was like 12. Um, so I'm sure he remembers everything. I'm sure it was ingrained deeply, sadly.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just interesting how each group takes it to a different level and to a
Right.
different place. And then when you have a cult that's gone unchecked for so long, it's really bizarre to see how far they take it. And in Scientology, can I show you something else?
Yeah.
They
Please.
have, let me see if I can do this. Stop screen. Don't look at my face. Let's see. Hold on. Hold on. I'm almost there. This. Okay. This is Scientology's explanation as to why somebody has bad things happen to them. It is called the overt motivator sequence. So, I mean, you see it's in italics even. Hopefully you guys can see this. I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can see they have their own language about it, overt motivator. And
Mhm.
basically, when someone has received something bad, he also may tend to feel he has done something bad to deserve it. And it just goes on basically saying that the reason that anything bad happens to you, essentially, is because you have pulled it in. You believed that it was a justification then for doing something bad. So anytime something bad happens to you, it's use this exact thing, overt motivator sequence, to then
Mhm.
turn it back around on you, because you can never be at the effect of anything else unless you first have done something wrong against it in Scientology thinking. So the next step is, well, what do you do about it? Well, you confess.
Mhm.
And guess what? Your own memory isn't good enough. So let us help you confess by
Yep.
using the e-meter. And because you're not trained in the e-meter, why don't you go ahead and pay us, $25,000, and you take our daughter into there in that closed room and you have her confess so that she feels better. That's like So unchecked. Why is this unchecked?
Yeah.
Why can this happen? And I debated on whether I wanted to share it now or not. But in Scientology, there is a children's security check. Can we talk about this?
Yes,
Is that okay?
please.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'll try to keep my cool because it sucks and it
Mhm.
frustrates me. Let's see.
It's
Stop
rough.
screen. I have to start this over. Hold on, everybody.
You're good.
That's the whole track. Here we go. I don't know. Can you guys see that? Should I
I
make it?
can.
Can I make it bigger? Oh, that's the other way. Hold on. Okay, maybe that's better. So this is the children's security check. This is from, as you can see at the top, started in 1961. It is for children aged 6 to 12. How long ago was 1961? 40, 20, like 60 years ago? It's a
Yeah.
long time for children to be security checked. This is a list of questions that are specifically for children. And the reason that you do it at 6 is because that's about the age that they can hold those cans and sit down.
Yeah.
The cans that John Travolta was holding, they're called cans. I think because originally they were soup cans, which is kind of weird to think about. But yeah. So you squeeze the cans, you get it all collaborated, what's the right word, to your body, coordinated with your body, take a deep breath. You
Mhm.
have to maintain contact because it's an electrical pulse. So you're not walking around the room, you're not doing anything. You're sitting in a chair and you're keeping your hands very still.
Mhm.
Um, Children younger than 6 can't even hardly do that. And there's 99 questions here. So that's a lot. And then imagine the times that they like wiggle and it looks like their needle moved and it didn't, and they have to go down a rabbit hole with each question. So
And what 6-year-old isn't wiggling? Like, that's
I
crazy.
know, wiggle, wiggle. I know. And that's the thing. It's like 99 questions, and this becomes a priority. This typically becomes a priority. Now, when does a child do this? In my experience, I did it as a preventative measure at 8 years old because I was about to go off to boarding school. And, if you're a true believer, you think this is actually helping somebody because it's getting off their crimes, which therefore is making them almost spiritually safer because then
Mhm.
bad things won't happen to them as much, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, so my mother actually did a security check on me in our home office in Utah when I think it was 8, 9, before I was going to boarding school or on my break at boarding school. I can't remember which. Uh, and that I believe was designed to help me. So cool. uh,
So great, thanks.
yeah. So we just crickets over here. Nobody's saying anything. But here we go. Uh, okay, just listen to some of these. Tell me. I'm going to read like 5 of them, and I want you to tell me just your first reaction. Okay. What has somebody told you not to tell? Have you ever decided you do not like some member of your family? Have you ever taken something belonging to somebody else and never given it back? Have you ever pretended to be sick, ill? Have you ever made yourself sick or ill to hurt somebody or make somebody sorry? Thoughts?
Well, I was just gonna say, or I was gonna ask, when kids do these and they confess, my understanding is nothing really happens afterwards, right? Unless they're bad enough. You talked about like conditions earlier when we were talking about like there sometimes is a public aspect of it. There are some things that you have to, in the Christian language, we would probably call it like repent for. Certain things you have to fix. But like as a kid, mostly for this, you answer these questions and then you're forced to confess things that may or may not even be true because of the cans. And then there's not really like follow-up support for that, right? Like there's not, they don't go through with the kid and like say, like in a therapy setting, like I'm thinking some of these questions in a therapy setting, like if a kid answered honestly to something like that, there would be support for the child, right? To be like, oh, why do you think that was? And like, how did that make you feel? And what do you think you could do differently? Or do you feel like that was the best way to handle it or whatever? But in Scientology, they're not doing that. They're not supporting the child through potential answers to this, right?
In this process, no. This
Okay.
is simply you would sit down, you would eventually, when you started actually asking the questions, the person would use their robotic training to deliver the command, the question to you in an impinging type way. And then they would use their training of only acknowledging certain statements in certain ways. So you're not having an open conversation. They're just acknowledging you. Okay, thank you. I will repeat the question, or they will move on to another question. And you're
Right.
always trying to get to a particular needle movement called the floating needle.
Right.
And until you achieve that particular movement on the e-meter, you will not move on from the question. You will
Mhm.
continue to ask an earlier similar time. So, what if somebody told you not to tell? Oh, well, Bobby told me not to tell that he ate gum in class. Okay, thank you. If my needle didn't immediately float from that, I'd say, please, tell me about an earlier similar time. Oh, well, last year, Bobby had the gum again and I had some. Okay, and then if my needle did not get to where it needed to go, they would ask me again, tell me an earlier similar time. It's like, oh, well, when I was a baby, the first memory I ever have is I had gum and I
Mhm.
wasn't supposed to. And somebody said, don't tell your mom. And they're like, okay, but if my needle still doesn't get there, whether that's a real memory or not, we got to go earlier again. And
Oh,
so you end up in this really shady ground of timelines, but you're always going earlier. It doesn't matter if it's later, you always go back further, further, further. So I could literally sit there and say, oh, when I was like a Roman peasant, somebody gave me this leaf that I chewed on, and they were like, don't tell. And it was my first experience like that.
yeah.
And if my needle floated, they'd be like, okay, thank you. You're good.
Yeah, so they're literally just waiting for that flow. Because like, I'm thinking, like, have you ever forgotten to give food or water to a pet entrusted in your care? Like, I'm just thinking how scary and sad that is for, like, a poor 6, 7-year-old kid to be like, "Oh my gosh, I did
Right.
forget to feed, like, my dog this morning," and if
Right.
that's it and the needle floats, that was the whole point. So there's no, like,
Mhm.
trusted or safe person on the other end of that to be like, "That's okay." Like,
Right.
we all forget things and, like, that happens, and you're only 7, so,
Yeah.
like, that's normal, and what are some ways we can help remember that next time so that our pet always has food? Can mommy help you? Like, I'm thinking of like child development and therapy, and like,
Yes.
some of these questions can cause like some really serious harm in a child
Yeah.
without the response of a safe, trusted adult. Because now your mind as a kid with these false things, true or false, depending on how far back you're going,
Right.
the child's mind is left spinning with
Yes.
these of like, "Oh my gosh,
Yes.
what have I done?" That's how I imagine this playing out.
It is. Yes, exactly. And, I think in a therapy setting as well, you might ask a question or two. I mean, questions of this, I mean, they're so broad. Have you ever bullied a smaller child? Have you ever deliberately got another child or grown up into trouble? You could spend all day talking about something like that.
Right.
Um, so in a therapy setting, I can't imagine 99 questions slammed
Right.
back to
Right.
back over the period of hours and if not days, definitely days. You don't do all this in one day. So,
Right.
um, yeah, there's, I guess, that aspect of, as well. This was the part that I think really doing this to a child in particular is so brazenly inappropriate that I think it's a good example. Um,
Mhm.
let's see here. When we had talked about it before, the thought control, unethical use of confession to
Mhm.
disrupt and or dissolve identity boundaries. And that's something I've really come to understand more. uh, but how much invasion of privacy something like this is.
Right.
And that can be, I think, when we're talking about child development, we're talking about identity of, self identity, um, especially young children. This would be 6 to 12. So you've already passed your early childhood. Now you're really forming your identity and your place in the world around you, in your community, the human race at large. Um, and so it's hard to understand how much and in what ways this repetitive use of this at that could affect a
Right.
person
Yeah.
during formative years. And so this is one of the most important, most dangerous things in Scientology, in my opinion. And a lot of people don't know about it because a lot of people don't have 6 and 12 to 12-year-olds in Scientology. And I don't even think they approach everybody with this solution, to be honest. But the true believers who have children who they consider to be ill or out of sorts or different or not fitting in or having problems in any area of development could be prescribed and subjected to this entire process as a helping solution, as what happened in my case. Or
Right.
I thought it was a helping solution.
It
Whatever
was
that
it was made to seem that way, but
exactly.
it is a form of control.
Yes,
And then
clearly.
some of these questions get a little crazy. Do you want to
They do. Let's see, let's check our time. So you've got a hard hour, so let's spend like 5 minutes and then we can look at these starred comments. I
Okay.
don't know what's happening in the chat. I can't tell. I don't know what's
You're
going
good. I've starred some of them.
on. Wait, what am I doing? Okay, I have to take this off. Hold on. Take that off. Hi, here we are. And then I have to add something else.
Okay.
Um, present, share screen. Nope. Yeah. Okay. I never had this one done to me. This is the most wild one ever. Ever, ever, ever. This is called the whole track. Let me go to the shop. This is called the whole track security check. I think they named it something else later. It's very, very bizarre. But this is to check a person on their entire history of their entire spiritual existence ever.
So
Okay.
this is not the one they use on kids. This is
No.
like a whole track security check.
Yeah, I thought we were running out of time, so I switched real
Oh,
quick
no.
over from this
I
children's
just
one also.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to clarify that
Yeah,
that's where
all these are available online. Like, you can just find all these questions. So, yes, this is off the children's one. I've never heard of a child actually having to do this one. Um, I don't know if they even do this really that much anymore, but imagine, let's just play a game. Imagine you have just paid $30,000 to participate in something that's going to help you. And so you're like scientific guy with his artifact, his, Scientology e-meter comes around and you sit down and these are the questions that you are asked. Have you ever enslaved a population? Have you ever ordered yourself or yourself committed genocide? Have you ever degraded a religion? Have you ever, I can't read all these out loud, you guys.
Yeah. Have you
Like,
ever blanked a child of blank? Have you ever warped an educational system?
yeah, have you ever warped one? I mean, I don't
What?
know. Have you ever destroyed an economy?
That one's hilarious to me. Are
Right?
you solely responsible for
Oops.
destroying an entire economy of an entire nation?
Right? Here's one. Have you ever stolen a body from another being? Like, were you ever a ghost and, like, a poltergeist and you just stole somebody else's what is that? Were you ever, like, possessing somebody else? Yeah, have you ever upset an ecology? Oh, that's a dick move if you
Like
have.
an ecosystem?
I think so. Yeah.
Like, were you a
I'm
bacteria that infiltrated an
I don't
ecosystem,
know.
ruined
I
it?
would be on this question for, like, forever, though, because I would have to recall every single plastic bag I've ever thrown away.
Oh
I'd be
my
like,
god,
I did upset an ecology."
I actually did.
I'm so sorry, though. And that is I laugh now, but that is kind of one of the things that happens because
Yeah.
you just I mean, have you ever obliterated a language? I mean, does that mean I spoke it so poorly that I obliterated it? Yeah, probably. Uh,
Probably. Yeah, 'cause, like, it's funny to look back on, but, like, in the moment, you're kind of stressing, like, thinking through
yeah.
because you're in the belief system. You are
Yeah,
fully in the indoctrination, and you think these are very serious questions. You think these are very
you
literal,
do.
very serious questions, and
You
you
do.
are racking your brain trying to figure out what you do.
Yes. And, that brings up something else that there's prescribed lists, and then there's also like lists for people. There's one called the 2D, which is all about intimate relations, procreation, the act that gets you to procreation, good or bad. And Danny Masterson had one of these security checks specifically on his marriage and his activities. Which I find really interesting. So where's that information? So anyway, it's just really interesting how they gather information and they do nothing with it, it seems like, except for control people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a form of control, because we know it's not doing anything because like you said earlier, the thought is this is helping you clear things to have a potentially safer spiritual state.
Right.
And so we know it's not doing that, and it's actually actively causing harm.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's a problem. All right, well, I don't wanna talk about that anymore. Boo. You wanna do our starred comments and get the heck out of here?
Yeah, we can look at some comments. I don't know why somebody started this one,
I
but
think I did. Oh, yeah, get my book, everybody, which is literally called Confessions of an Ex-Scientologist Pothead. So,
speaking of confessions,
on brand, bitches, on brand.
Liz
Yeah.
continues confessing
Yeah.
to this day.
It's way more salacious than this one was, because I could hide behind my keyboard a little bit more. That's always
Yes.
that's
And
always
then
fun.
Liz Ferris says,
Oh,
"You're
Liz,
amazing,
thanks.
Liz."
Liz is like, "I like watching you because it always makes me happy," and I'm just like, "We're gonna talk about some really messed up stuff.
A
Sorry.
little stressful,
My
but always
bad."
nice. The Bells Tolling said, I've read all of Hassan's books. Stephen Hassan, he is the creator of the bite model. They recommend highly. I also highly recommend. There
Agreed.
is Combating Cult Mind Control, Freedom of Mind, The
Mhm.
Cult of Trump. And I think he has one more that I can't remember, but all very fascinating if you're interested in more of the nitty gritty of like how cults operate.
Yeah. I say I'll put things in the description, I'll put links, but I never really get back to it, so just Google it.
Yeah.
Google it and buy it.
Liz and I might put links to something in the description, but we also might not.
Yeah.
So,
That's funny. That was part of it. That's in my book. That's actually in a section of my book, and I did think it was 'cause I had red hair. I was like, "I was a red hair in a past life, like, I was a powerful redhead." And then obviously it was Queen Elizabeth I.
I
Duh.
mean, to
You're
be fair, that's
sorry.
a logical conclusion. Like,
Oh my gosh, yes. And what if I had to do that whole track thing? I would have, like, believed I was Queen Elizababeth who did all these messed up things. I'd be like, "Have you ever enslaved a population?" And I would not know if I had or not.
you would have been like,
Ah!
"Oh my gosh, maybe
It's
I
so
actually might have.
stressful.
Did I ruin an economy?" Actually, didn't Queen Elizabeth do really well for the economy?
I
Was it?
think she did well for people on her side, and I think she, like, really messed up other people.
That's
Religious. I think she had, like, religious I think she tortured some people and stuff. Yeah, I don't think it was good.
probably.
Sorry. Sorry. My bad.
Sorry for what Liz did as Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
The bells tolling again. Cults use a person's individuality and insecurities against them. They
Yeah,
absolutely do.
they do, and shame and
Yeah.
fear, which is
Mhm.
why if you release that shame and fear of people finding out about things,
Mhm.
sometimes it makes people feel better, safer.
Yes. And then Willie says they train children to do this. I think he was referring to auditing. Um,
Yes.
and it's like a twisted form of essay. And I agree
Yeah,
with that.
I
I
agree,
think,
and
yeah.
go ahead. I was gonna
I was just
say
gonna say
first.
having a minor
Mhm,
asking an adult or even other minors some of those questions
mhm.
and not understanding in a way to be able to consent to the conversations they're having and the experiences they are having, I absolutely think is a form of essay.
Yeah, I agree. And even just being, yeah, exposed to, like, certain concepts or facts or crimes of other people, it does inform your development when you're a kid.
Mhm.
Bullshit.
Yes. And then Julie, I started this one Because Julie says when you go to confession, you aren't interrogated. You tell the priest what you need to confess, and he gives you your penance.
It's
And
good to
that
know.
is, I have all kinds of issues with the Catholic Church, but that is like a good distinction and a difference between Scientology and some religious confessions.
Right.
In like in the right way and the way that it's supposed to be done, the priest isn't guiding you to confess specific things.
Right.
The priest is just there to witness your confession and, like she says, give you penance. And there aren't these like, they're not pointing you to things in the way that Scientology does. And in the way I've seen it done in some evangelical culty settings. Like that's not, I don't think that's a tenet of the evangelical church to force confessions of sins or to guide it, but it's
Right.
done with bad leaders. I'm sure a priest has probably abused that and led people
For sure.
in one way or another if they were a harmful leader. But that is a good distinction of
Mhm.
listening instead of guiding or pointing.
Yeah, that's true, or demanding. And,
Mhm.
I guess that's the other thing of a therapy setting is you can leave whenever you want. You
Right.
can't
Right.
leave. So, probably
Right.
probably should have led with that, huh? That
Yeah.
distinction. Okay, well,
Yeah.
it's important. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Awesome. All
Those are
right. Well,
most of the ones I starred. I was just gonna go through and see if
okay.
anyone said anything else while we were reading those. Um, yeah. I mean, some of these we could go down rabbit holes and talk forever, but
We could. Here, let's do this last one and then we'll get off
yes,
here. The Doodle Queen, SP Keyboard Warrior. What do you think was missing from your parents to have allowed this and other abuses? After watching SPTV parents, they would never consider it.
it's a good question.
Yeah, in my particular case, I think that it is generational indoctrination. Because if the parent is indoctrinated while the child is young or before the child is even born, then this stuff becomes fact. Like the fact that the overt motivator sequence works, um, is like non-negotiable. And so what's missing from my parents, I would say my mom in particular, because she was raised this way, is
Mhm.
just outside knowledge and other viewpoints.
Yeah, other
Just
information.
Mhm.
A lot of it is the information control and, like, not having access
Yes,
to what it's like otherwise. And
exactly.
And even when it's not generational, even when you join a cult as an adult, like indoctrination happens slowly over time.
Yeah,
So it removes you from reality and it removes you from yourself and your own
yep,
emotions. So like when they say like watching SPTV parents, you would never do that. It's because a lot of SPT parents, like, well, all of you are out of the cult. And
right,
most of the time you're reconnecting to your own self, your own feelings, your own identity. That's part of deconstructing from a cult. So you have access to your own emotions. And I think
right.
a lot of times parents in a cult are so far removed from their own
Yeah,
emotions, they cannot, and thought stopping techniques and all the other forms of undue influence, like you are not having normal cognitive thoughts and feelings that other people have.
right.
They're just not happening. So like you genuinely do not understand what's going on. And then
Mhm.
everybody's different. Everybody has a different line of like what they're willing and not willing to cut themselves off from.
Yeah, that's true. That
It's
is true.
very
Some
nuanced.
people seem more paternal to begin with, or not paternal, parental.
Yeah.
Yeah, not paternal. Wrong
Maternal,
word. Getting late.
maternal,
Yeah. All right,
either
well, great question. Thank you for asking that. I have been reminded that can you guys all smash the like button?
You know, I watch Fundy Fridays on YouTube, and she always says consensually smash the like
There
button.
you go. I like that. I like that.
I was like, I love
All right. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this conversation today. It
yeah,
was a little bit of a heavier topic, but um, something near and dear to my heart. And I think something that everybody should be aware of.
yeah.
So I'm glad
Hopefully
that,
you learned something.
yeah, hopefully you guys learned something. I'm trying to get us out of here. Let's see. Was I going to do one more thing? Oh, please, everybody go over to Cassie Marie at No Culty Vibes and like it over there and subscribe and I am the Liz Gale. Check out my book on Amazon. I promise. It's Confessions. You'll love it. Don't text me afterward and tell me what you think about me unless it's good. Okay? Okay, bye. All right.
Thanks for
Bye,
watching.
everybody.
Bye.